Hi, everyone. Welcome to another week. I'm glad that you could join us. This week, I'm talking about how to infuse creativity into your classes. And joining me today is Thomas, my son, who is also interested in being a teacher someday, so he likes to pop in and say hello. And he was going to share a couple things that he likes in his class that they do to help infuse some creativity there versus coming up with the right answer for everything all the time. What are some things you do at school and after school with your clubs as well?
So, at school we have a quiet time right after lunch and about the middle of the day. And then I make like books there. I'm working on my second book, right now. And also I'm starting a coding club the day after tomorrow, a theater club tomorrow, and I do some art.
And some music.
hmm
On Mondays in math, they have Mystery Mondays where they
Oh
solve
yeah.
different things. And they've got
And
some,
on Wednesdays I have a craft club.
yep. So a few things like that that he really enjoys for sure within his own creativity. And I'm going to have him sign off while we go to the traditional presentation here. You want to say goodbye?
Bye!
Okay, so let's begin. Our session today is about a few things. We're going to be looking at how to create more creative outlets for our students. We know that traditionally, and I think especially sometimes within our public schools even more, or the older students are, we tend to work more and more with them on the right answers through more single-focused projects. We also are going to look at kind of what creativity is, why it matters, and different ideas for how to infuse more creativity into your classes. And then at the end, a task for you is to think about what your action plan is moving ahead. So what is creativity? We're talking about something that's new, that's novel, that creates ideas that are also of value. Of course, there's more than one definition to creativity. This is one that is often used, however. It's connecting. Sometimes it could be connecting to seemingly unrelated things in an effective way. That could also include problem solving or creative problem solving. But how do we, connect two different or diverse things, come up with new and novel ideas? And this is something that's important. Even when Thomas was talking, he was mentioning art and music, which is certainly a part of creativity. But I want us to keep thinking about what are ways within math, within science, within world language, where we can infuse that creativity, because it's not just for those specials or for the arts. Probably the biggest name within creativity is E. Paul Torrance, and I'm going to show you actually part of the screen a little bit further here. So he defined creativity as involving four different things. Fluency. We're going to come back to this idea in a moment, but that's just the sheer output of a lot of ideas. And so a lot of times kids get so focused, especially some of our perfectionistic students, where they want the right answer. So they're not thinking about all the possibilities, right? So we want more fluency there, and kind of shutting off our brain, the critical or judgmental part of our brains, and going with just whatever comes to mind. Flexibility, so coming up with new thoughts or ideas. Elaboration, so getting into great detail in a creative way. And then originality, something that's very unique or unusual. Why is it important? And that's the question on this next slide here. Whoops, sorry. Why is teaching creativity important? We know, well, two things that aren't mentioned on here as well. A little under a decade ago, there was a big article that came out called The Creativity Crisis, and we really became aware of something that has continued to become continued to be a problem since then, which is as a nation, one of the things that, besides leading in a lot of other ways academically, we know that our creativity was a major and continues to be a major source of our strength. That includes the amount of patents, Nobel Peace Prize winners, literary authors, and so on, that have created just some amazingly creative things. So although some other places might be producing more mathematicians, for instance, or more scientists at times, we are still often the innovators and some of the people that are winning the highest accolades for inventing or creating new things that have not yet been thought of. So that's always been our strength. And yet what we're seeing is a tremendous decline in this. And children are becoming less and less creative earlier and earlier. Children tend to be the most creative at the beginning of school, and that continues to be stymied. So by the time some of you that work with much older students, it's been long gone. Not that it's not in there somewhere, but it's been buried for a while, and it can take a while for students to then come back to that idea of where they originally came from. So it's a bit of a crisis when we think about the world needs, with all the problems that we have, right? We demand creative and novel solutions. We can't really see which way our world is going to go all the time, but we do know that we need some people to be thinking outside the box. We know that children can enhance their creativity. So whether we're working with a 3 or 4-year-old and they are just having fun with art versus a craft where there's a particular way that something should look at the end, that's not creativity, that is a craft, right? So how do we shift that and enhance their creativity, whether we're talking about preschool or high school? And then how can we promote their thinking capabilities by creating an environment that's going to help that? Some of the barriers we mentioned, one is that there are very structured instructions and materials that could include crafts, that could include in math and so on, where it's what are the steps, what is the correct answer. We've got a lot of practice at that, a lot of convergent answer types of assignments, very little typically divergent answer types of assignments, and you absolutely can do that within any of the disciplines. But often we relegate that, if anywhere, we relegate it to recess or to, art or music and so on. Oftentimes not even there. So we want to be thinking about where are we doing that in our classes and in our schools. We have very structured materials and structured instructions typically as well. So when children don't expect a reward, for instance, they are more creative. This is some research has been done on this, and they enjoy the process more. So for a while, they were trying to basically look at the impact of rewards, monetary awards, prizes, and so on children's creative output. I can think of one classic psychology experiment where they were given rewards for their artwork. Well, these kids were they were cranking out more and more art to try to get the rewards, but what they had used to perform for the love of it, actually the quality went way down pretty quickly, and they stopped liking it. It wasn't something that they were naturally being drawn to. So we know that we are creative by nature. We tend to be inspired by movement, by dance, by nature, by the arts, by music, and we want to enhance that and make sure that we're not rewarding them for things that they would automatically, there would be an intrinsic reward of their love of that. We don't need to give the gold stars for it on top of it. This is a fun activity. You can think about ways to modify this in your classes, but this is a paperclip activity. So over the next 60 seconds, I'm going to ask you to please get a piece of paper first and a writing utensil. And you can pause this. That's the good thing about it being a video. And over the next 60 seconds, I would like you to think of all the uses you can think of and write that down for a paperclip, beginning now. You're still writing. All the uses you can think of for a paperclip. There's still 30 seconds. Ten-second countdown. And finishing up your last thought and putting down the paper. So two things, because it's a video. One, I wonder if you resisted this activity, or perhaps you fast forwarded ahead or thought, I'm just going to think about these things in my head. One, notice this resistance. Two, this is a great activity for a couple reasons. One, it's on the spot. I'm asking you to write just output. And we've already talked a little bit about creativity, and so you know we're looking at things like fluency and originality and elaboration and so on. So that helps a lot. I can tell you that this is much harder for those of us that are older or those that are perfectionists and so on, versus a lot of little ones that are still tapped into this. So we can think about this, and let's start looking at those possibilities again. Remember, we're looking at fluency would be the number of responses you wrote across a minute. So with very little ones, of course, we would be helping them with this, but they wouldn't have to be very old to start working on this piece as well. Maybe you could do it as a whole group, and then you could be writing down their responses also. Think about things beyond a paperclip where we could ask, like, let's really think about these creative things. So fluency, and we're celebrating. Whoa, oh, look at all the ideas. There's no such thing as a good idea, or a bad idea, rather. It's kind of that brainstorming process, right? Shut off the critic and just go with it. Originality. So I can tell you a lot of people, and this is the common, but we would see first, of course, things like utilitarian purposes, holding things together and so on would, of course, be the most common, but not far behind would be types of weapons, types of jewelry, implements for zippers or holding things together or hanging things from walls. So those are great responses. It's kind of fascinating after a while though, you realize, oh gosh, I thought it was creative. A lot of people came up with that one. This is our creativity muscle, is a muscle that can be enhanced and developed. So after a while, I'll tell you some crazy ones I've heard over the years that are very original. I never said anything about the size or the material it was made from. So people will sometimes run with that. I heard of a giant paperclip that was used like a catapult, or paper clips that were used as snowshoes for Barbie. Okay. Elaboration. So someone might say earrings, necklace, so on. Someone else might describe and talk about the colors and the bends and so on and go into much more detail. And then flexibility. So maybe you listed 8 types of jewelry or 4 types of jewelry, but someone else had jewelry and weapons and utilitarian purposes and science experiments and so on. So they had more categories. Now I can tell you, if we did this again, typically I would do it fresh without telling a student anything, and then we would talk more about creativity and what we're looking for, and then go with that. My favorite little kid example or story that I have is I was always doing little activities and exercises where kids had, free time to explore what they wanted to do. We would do that sometimes at the end of the day or within our last chunks of time in classes, or we would have Friday fun clubs and so on, where kids could run with and create little clubs for an hour, and if they wanted to do tea parties or Pokemon or whatever they were into, we would create that space. And I know some of you have that freedom, or ways that you can find bits of that freedom and some of you don't. However, I guess my point is it was an environment where they could see, coming up with like the most creative responses in their writing or in their work was really celebrated. And I can remember one student one day, and I actually just saw her graduate high school. So we were reflecting on this together, but she was in kindergarten at the time, and she wanted to be, we were talking about Halloween. It was around that time of year, and said, what do you want to be for Halloween? And other kids were saying, superheroes or princesses and so on. And she said, I want to be a shoe. And I had such a awe-inspired. Like, that is the most cool thing I've ever heard. I had such a big response that she did. She went out, she had her mom create this giant shoe. She stepped into the shoe. She was the sock. It was the coolest thing. So just know that you're going to reap the rewards of some really creative, kind of fascinating things by implementing some of this more so in your class. Things to think about within your classroom, and we'll circle back to this toward the end, so I won't spend much time now, but we want to think about functional freedom. So the world of possibilities, that can be, you know, we see that with kids and with everyone, that joy of, say, a box, where a box could be you know, a car or an airplane or a house or any number of things, right? So we want their imaginations to dictate the object rather than the object dictating what it is. And I'll give some examples there. So think about your environment and think about if there's functional freedom in your environment. Some other examples, and this is one that one of my colleagues uses. World building. So here's hands-on. You could do this you could be the facilitator. So students will describe a fantasy world with a facilitator asking questions and acting as a note keeper. When the broad concepts are established, they'll draw a map of their world. And when they have their map, they could tell a story about someone that lives in that world. So this is something that could be extended. It could be small. It's also something that could really go in depth over time. Think about if you are in preschool or elementary levels, you know, up through kindergarten, first, second grade. Do you have any toys in your class, right? Do you have that house area? If so, is there more or less freedom there? I know sometimes, unfortunately, I had to kind of sneak that into my kindergarten class sometimes in the public system versus private. There's some differences there, right? And we're often teaching our young students, especially if they're advanced, we try to kind of teach them the way we would teach a third or fourth grader. But hopefully there are some types of toys or materials in your class still. But, you know, can they be socks that are created into sock puppets versus a policeman puppet? It's usually just played with as a policeman, right? It's kind of already set up for them. So we want more freedom to those toys. If you've ever visited or heard of Reggio Emilia, I highly recommend it for beautiful, aesthetically pleasing, artistic types of models and modes of running an entire school. There's a Reggio Emilia, it's called the Journey School in Boulder, that they certainly welcome visitors, but they do some amazing things also they have arts centers and they have recycling centers. You can see here where they're reusing materials, especially ones that can't be recycled, by color, by texture, and so on. And it's really, it's a beautiful thing to be a part of if you haven't gotten to see it yet. Think about your lesson plans. So can you have more learning centers or lesson plans that are more open? Recycling centers, imagination creation stations, where there's just stuff, right? That's what you could do sometimes with those old toilet paper rolls and so on. Let them create something versus the craft type of thing that we tend to gravitate toward. Can we integrate movement and music? I absolutely did a lot of movement and music within my classes, including math and science and social studies. I enjoyed it, the kids enjoyed it, and I found, thank goodness for the internet nowadays, I found a lot of great songs on YouTube as well. And so whether we were counting or talking about the beginnings of learning how to tell time or recognizing coins, there were lots of songs that I sang, and I would often put them on popsicle sticks, and then we would draw them out of a container, and we would start our classes that way. Outdoor fun. Can we have paint brushes? And that could just be painting with water, using items from nature and bringing it back into class, having more free choice or child chosen as part of that class or part of your day whenever possible. I really enjoyed, again, where maybe there were I might set out 5 or 10 areas and describe what all is in them, and let the students, with using some sand timers, things like that for the younger students, to know how long, or maybe you have some parameters around how many students can be in a particular area or center at a time, but there's a rotation, and you can get very creative about, you know, how many students are in a area at a time, and look for things to cycle through, maybe offering some possibilities, but being as hands-off as possible as well. Within your lesson plans, can there be student choice? Anytime we can offer choice, which of course is part of differentiation for students as well, where, you know, here's 3 ideas, and maybe you have another one which is, you know, here's 3 ideas, or choose your own with teacher permission, right? So there's particular things that you might be looking for, but you're trying to give them some freedom again. Problem-based learning. Sometimes we talk about project-based learning as well, but problem-based learning, this could be at any age level where you identify a particular problem, a current problem, food waste, bullying, lack of time for interests or in classes, feeling bored in school. So presenting that problem and let the students form a team. We can create a general template, but again, we're more of a facilitator or a guide on the side versus the sage on the stage. Can we help these students come up with, you know, give them the freedom and some structures to where they can come up with some goals, they can come up with timelines for our guidance to help solve some of these things. I know within my son's school they've done quite a bit both with food waste and with bullying in terms of students helping lead and come up with some change there. One thing I enjoyed a lot with students, including gifted students, was doing some things with writing prompts. So I would have students they could draw pictures, they could also write down particular words or sentence stems, and I would give them some time to do that, and we would put it again in some type of bucket, and I would give them, say, a minute for them to write that down or draw that picture. You could do a 2 or 3 minute timer. I like to add those as well, so they're learning some time concepts as well. And then I would draw those out of the bucket. So let's say someone wrote down the word treehouse. And then I would set a timer for everyone. A lot of times I liked doing the minute quick writes or minute assignments where they would then be able to, everyone would draw a picture, or maybe you have write as much as they can in the next minute, not worrying about spelling or structure. That's not the focus at all. It's all about celebrating creativity and diversity, and everyone would have a minute to write about treehouse. Or maybe I draw another one and someone wrote, you know, my dog, Bowser the Schnauzer, write about Bowser the Schnauzer for the next minute, and then really celebrating all those differences. Some students are going to get really stuck already. They want to do it right. They want to follow the rules. They want to get stuck on the spelling. So I would really celebrate those bigger, more expressive words, and ignore the errors. And we would have a policy then where if they wanted to correct anything at the end, they could put the words that they were struggling with spelling up in a word jail. I don't remember who I got that from over the years, but I would put that up on the whiteboard, and then we would go through and we'd talk about how to spell words after the fact. That way it's not cramping or slowing down their creativity. Some secondary examples, so these are much older students. The Quiet Year, we've got the website there, map-making storytelling game where players represent a post-apocalyptic society rebuilding over the course of 4 seasons. This is one that a colleague of mine uses with older students as well. Each turn, a player responds to an event, advances a meta story about the community, and adds to the map. So similar again. And then telestrations, like a game of telephone where players alternate between a drawing and text. If you have additional questions on this material, as you research it a bit more, please let me know and I can put you in touch with my colleague also. Some other programs and ideas. This is for DPS folks, but Destination Imagination, that goes around, well, even in the country and beyond, but within our state, you can look up Destination Imagination, and if you're a part of Denver Public Schools, you can reach out to Minda McGurk. So there are essentially teams and and students can opt into this. This is something though that teachers are starting to look at doing during the school day as well. It's not terribly cost prohibitive, and there's a lot of scholarships as well. So you create these you have these project-based challenges rather than a problem-based challenge. And they're designed to build those skills in creativity, critical thinking, communication, and teamwork. So they work in teams to solve these things. But Destination Imagination is something that is across our state as well. For older students at the secondary level, middle school, high school, future problem solvers, that is connected and developed by E. Paul Torrance. Remember, we learned about him at the beginning as far as being a creativity pioneer. It's competitive and non-competitive curriculum, 6-step model. It teaches creative thinking, problem solving, and decision making. And then last, and this could be at any age, I've used this with younger students, and one of my colleagues is using this with older students, which is improvisation games and exercises. There are tons of books that you can get. The one that I used that was really high school and adults, but I used it with K-8, and I held on to that book and I modified some of the scenarios were not appropriate, but it gave me a base when I was looking for ideas as a teacher. And it was improvisation games and exercises. We might think of that again with a theater or a dramatic arts types of programs, but you absolutely can use these improvisation games and change the improvisation to be connected to a science concept that you're teaching, or connected to some public speaking skills and so on. And it's really getting students out of their head and into the moment, which is definitely a part of, right? We can't be fluent. We can't come up with innovative ideas if we're worried about sounding foolish or being judged. So how can we move beyond that? So what I'd like you to do again is to think for a moment about what's happening in your classroom right now. What types of materials are in your class that or aren't in your class that can help with fostering creativity and some divergent, unique thinking? What are some of the activities and lessons that you're using? Is there a way to give some more freedom and give some more time for some creative output? What's your attitude? So sometimes a lot of times coming up with the right answer, or maybe judging every single thing that students are doing in terms of grades and so on, or feeling like, I'm not creative. I talk to so many adults, I'm not creative, and they just mean they don't play an instrument and they don't paint particularly well. I have to remind them, those scientists, those computer programmers, right? That's all creative. Anytime you're creating or starting something. And then what's happening in your environment? Can you add centers or add components to your actual classroom that fosters some creative output with your students? What I'd like you to think of is, I call it PEP, but whether we're working with parents or students or with our own selves, it's really important we know to focus more on the positives or the things that we're doing well, and then always thinking about areas we can continue to encourage. So I've seen the opposite end where people are very harsh on themselves and they go right to what they're bad at, rather than looking at, what are areas that, not that we're bad, but we know we want to continue to further develop. And they don't focus on what they do well, or they go the opposite. And I've talked with people that they say, right, I've never had anyone tell me that I need to continue to improve on anything. I get top evaluations all the time and so on. And I know I will always need to continue to develop. We all do. So if we can focus more on the positives or our strengths as a teacher, or as a student or as a parent, but always be thinking as well about an area to encourage or to continue to develop. Sometimes it might be a weaker area, sometimes it may not. Sometimes people talk about, right, a compliment sandwich, but really it's just good for us psychologically and emotionally as well. So think about your environment, think about all of those aspects of your classroom, your activities, and so on. And what's something that you're doing very well, that you feel is a strength related to things you do for creativity? What are one or two things you'd like to implement or further develop, and what are other things you'd like to do to increase your creativity in your classes? Think about being specific with some type of due dates and so on, so that you can keep yourself on track as you try to do at least 1 to 2 new things, to either start or further develop some aspects of creativity in your classes. You are welcome to put that plan in a note to me or email me, and I will check in with you over the next week or so. So I'm going to flip back to the beginning here. That is the end of this presentation. I am glad that you're with me for another week again. And there I am. I hope you have a good upcoming week, and I will look forward to talking with you about your ways of infusing creativity in your classes. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.